Welcome back to the Rich Fritzky Show. I so appreciate having you with me and putting up with my babbling on about various memories and issues and the like. I trust I'm doing some good with it. Today I'm going back in time, just 2 years. About 2 years ago, my son Bill engineered a trip to sacred places in the United States of America that I had never seen, and that all of us ought to. Yellowstone, Zion, Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Muir Woods. Back in 2018. A few historical sites also were on the itinerary. Mount Rushmore, the Shiloh battlefield in Tennessee, Lincoln's birthplace in Hogganville, Kentucky, and Washington, D.C. Today, I but dwell on the very back end of the trip, what was a brief stay in a Trumpian Washington, where today the constitutional tenets of a free land are daily assaulted, just as they were this week with the invasion, and that's what it is, that's what it was, the invasion of federal forces in Portland, where protesters have been assaulted, corralled, and shoved into unmarked vans. New shit is dumped on the innocents in America daily. This is unprecedented, uncalled for, and uninvited by either the governor or the mayor of Portland itself. It's so wrong. It is a harbinger of what fascism is. On a much lighter note, really dropping down here, spectacular wonders aside, I also dedicated myself on that trip to finding the finest cinnamon bun in the land. The final run from Louisville, Kentucky to D.C. took us through the worst thunderstorm I have ever experienced. Couldn't see the exit signs. It's like the world had gone black. Darkness had settled in, apocalypse-like. A foreboding sign of the times? Maybe, I think. Out of it and into the cavernous mountains of southwestern Pennsylvania and West Virginia, we met roads and steep climbs engineered only for the daring. But interestingly, when Billy missed an exit, we got turned around a bit, and we were long on a Lincoln Avenue in southeastern Pennsylvania, and later a Lincoln Parkway, a highway, Lincoln Parkway. It was a hard run to our nation's capital, but there was a measure of comfort in knowing we went from the land where Lincoln was born and spent his earliest years, and that he was traveling with us on our way to Washington. Relieved to see the signs for Gettysburg, Hagerstown, Antietam, rendered famous by his Civil War. Finally, there in the distance was the beaming and welcoming light of the Washington Monument. I had expressed my hope of getting to Lincoln and his memorial, to the Vietnam Memorial, where I always visit my cousin David Cassidy, John Tomany, Jimmy Kovacs, and other special old friends. And then to the Martin Luther King Jr. and World War II memorials, which opened only after I got sick back in 2005 and 2006. Prior to then, I had often been in Washington to pitch ideas to both legislators and departmental bureaucrats, some of which actually did some good. But we, my wife, Maggie, brother-in-law Pete, and son Bill, got turned around immediately, and we wound up with Thomas Jefferson first. The door was barred to me, however, as we learned that the elevator there was temporarily out of order. Again, as traffic patterns were all wackadoodle, with so many Homeland Security-driven street closures, we went the wrong way again, and we found ourselves crossing the bridge to Arlington. So we thought, why not? Handicapped in wheelchairs apparently present higher danger, as Billy and Pete easily went through the new-to-me security portals. But I had to be body frisked, arms out and all. No biggie. But they went so far as to open my zipper to check out my threatening colostomy bag. And the pad on the inner part of my extremely short right stump was, let's just say, a bit too close for comfort. On the security madness front, by the way, I found the every so many minute runs of military helicopters from point to point on the immediate fringe of downtown D.C. to be extremely disconcerting and troubling. But still, Arlington, our national cemetery and a national shrine, remained what is to me a holy place, and we were off to visit the Kennedys. The sight of the white stone of the Custis Lee Mansion drew us to John's Eternal Flame, where the impact his death had upon me when I was 13 years old came flashing back. And there we paused. But I was off to visit Bobby, and the simple white stone that reads only Robert Francis Kennedy, with its elegantly simple white cross, juxtaposed to the vast universes of compassion, empathy, and tenderness that dwelled in him, his grave bears profound witness to his inherent humility. Having then just passed the 50th anniversary of his death, it felt like only yesterday. Extraordinary, 50 years, and he was still the political rock star of my days. For we would have been in an entirely different country had he lived. Just imagine the immediate end of Vietnam and not 7 more years of it. An all-out focus on healthcare, social injustice, income inequality, jobs development and training, voting rights, etc. That's the road that he wanted to go down, rather than the madness of the 50-year war on crime and drugs with its inevitable mandatory minimums and ever more prisons that began with Richard Milhous Nixon. I don't simply believe this about Bobby Kennedy. I know this. I am certain of it. That's why I have never stopped mourning his loss. I looked upon his cross and I saw him, the tousled hair, the sad hazel blue eyes, the familiar tears in his eyes, and oh, the welcoming smile that was so easy to conjure up. I considered the gifts of hope and inspiration that he gave me, that came, by the way, with lifetime warranties. And I prayed not so much for him, but rather for us. And I asked both him and my old friend Abe to give Bernie the strength to take another shot. We then trekked back to the Lincoln Memorial, where the elevator was, yes, temporarily out of order. While Pete and Bill went upstairs to see Abe, I remained in the small museum below, where a kind man informed me that no matter what national sanctuary I'd like to visit, the Smithsonian, the archives, all elevators are temporarily and for so long as we live like scared rabbits, out of order. As our America is, I might suggest, out of order. After a quick run by the Vietnam, World War II, and Martin Luther King Jr. memorials, we were off to Old Ebbitt's Bar and Grill, Pete's Treat. Its floor-to-ceiling polished wood, the grand windows, the ancient bar with its lush wooden overhangs stunned. Historically, it's billed as the oldest tavern in D.C., and a long, long line of presidents past, once upon a time, frequented the place. The bar was soon standing still room only, and I couldn't help but think that there had to be many a yuppie servant of the people there, devoid of hearts that bleed. For afterwards I met and talked with a bright African-American homeless man, Gus, who was, while in need of some fresh clothes, unaffected and unencumbered by alcohol or drugs. He wore his dog tags in witness to his service in Iraq. He was just 2 blocks from the United States Capitol, politely selling a self-published book on homelessness and life on the street, courtesy of a community-based advocacy organization. The overwhelming majority of folks just buzzed right by him. In fact, paces picked up before they reached him. They immediately slowed when they put him in the rear-view mirror, just as America has for far too long done. Heading home the next day, what was June 28, 2018, we were on a highway near Annapolis heading north when we counted more than 70 police and emergency vehicles rushing south, with sirens blaring and red lights flashing. We had set off to look for America, and there, having inadvertently passed by the 5 shot dead that morning at the Baltimore Gazette, yet another shooting that will take its place on the Great Mandela, with the oh so many other shootings that we ignore. Numb, we do nothing. Our beloved America shockingly does nothing, as we have again and again and again done nothing, because our representatives belong to the gun lobby and not to we the people. For the record, I have, among a distinct minority, forever maintained that the Second Amendment is null and void. It's bogus. And that the right to bear arms is definitively tied only to the need for standing civilian militias to be at the ready if trouble brewed. There is a clear dependent to independent subordinate clause to main clause causal relationship, wherein the driver is no longer there to support the right to bear, or that which ultimately and always lied in a dependent posture. Long replaced by standing armies, and backed by the richest and most mammoth Department of Defense in the world, the need attached to the right disappeared centuries ago. And locally, like them or not, we have police departments. So fixed grammatical rules scream out to us, but we prefer to rather ignorantly and in perpetuity celebrate this daft defilement of the English tongue. With all due respect to the feverish emotions that abound here, forgive me for wanting to throw up whenever I hear any phony legislator pompously guffawing about the sanctity of the Second Amendment. On our route home, we stopped by my son Joe's and daughter-in-law Krista's home in Brick Township, New Jersey. It was to be brief, but Joey handed me one beer, a blood orange IPA, that had a startling and angry image of Abraham Lincoln on the can. He was throwing a punch with his left hand and shattering what had been a huge and menacing block or boulder in his path. As to his right hand, he was protecting the flag, the country, us. This image of Lincoln was intense. It immediately struck me that the purpose and theme of my own work in progress, Unfading Light, the sustaining insight and inspiration of Abraham Lincoln, was not unlike that of this most unusual beer can. Can you imagine a beer can intent on proselytizing and advocating a beer can that boldly and loudly proclaimed that America needs to get right with Abraham Lincoln again? Were Lincoln to magically visit Washington today, I think he'd be so taken aback, troubled by the scope and scale, certainly by the magnitude of his own memorial. He'd be impressed by the improved sanitation, to be sure, but stunned and even puzzled by the massive Pentagon and the vast technology that can be employed to both defend and destroy. Interested in the advances made in that area in his own time during the Civil War, he'd be blown away, but also extremely worried. The World War II and Vietnam memorials would for long occupy him, and he'd be keenly interested in Martin Luther King, who so very belatedly advanced work that he did his part to set in motion. The ever-buzzing helicopters would amaze, and I think he'd be saddened to think that 154 years removed, Washington remained a city in need of protection in a strange new world where everything would appear to be moving at the speed of light. If he dove into policy on healthcare, poverty, immigration, education, incarceration, hunger, he'd be appalled and deeply saddened as to just how far removed we are from his ultimate desire to raise all Americans up in the race of life. He'd be amazed to see that the know-nothings, who he beat back in his own day, were back again. And were he to review the policies of and read the shocking words of the one in the White House today, he'd be horrified and enticed to magically stick around, to pick up that old spiritual and terrible swift sword. Imagination runs wild, and I certainly imagine big. Coming back down to earth, fantasies aside, I hold on to a belief that we, America, in mirroring both Lincoln and Bobby Kennedy and in tapping their rich legacies and promises, might again find strength enough to begin reversing the great damage. Damage to what? To liberty, to law, to science and sense, and to honor, healing, hope. Please note my Lincoln book is finally in production now and will be available this fall. But most importantly, note, November 3rd is D-Day for America. Vote. Get family and friends out to vote. Take our country back from this darkness. Oh, on that much lighter note, and lest I forget, the best cinnamon bun in America It was close. In second place was the Coffee and Cookie Shop on Market Street in Louisville, Kentucky. It had a melt-in-your-mouth taste to beat the band that was complemented by, and I mean this, the best cup of coffee I think I have ever had. But the winner was the Chasing Bear Pancake House. Love that name. Chasing Bear Pancake House in West Yellowstone, Montana. Big sky-like indeed. It was a mountain of a bun, built for 4 to 6, massive. It covered a full plate and was served warm, smelled great, tasted great, and lasted and lasted. Sure, I was ignoring doctor's orders, but hell, it was a vacation, and America just needed to know this. You needed to know this. Needed some good news for a change. A bonus tip, the best restaurant on our trip, Famous Dave's Barbecue in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is, by the way, worthy of a podcast of its own. Take care. Thanks for being with. Have a great week. Keep on smiling.